Welcome to our podcast. I'm Alyssa Dufresne, and with me I have...
Kayla Cook.
Oh yeah.
And this is our podcast all about Agatha Christie and our thoughts, commentary, social commentary.
Analysis, reactions. Yeah. All that jazz. Alright, today we are discussing How Does Your Garden Grow, which is a short story.
Published in the U.S. in Ladies' Home Journal, June 1935, and then in The Strand, August 1935. Is that earlier in Agatha Christie's career?
Yes, because her first Poirot book was 1920, so this is about 15 years into her Poirot writing career.
Okay.
I was kind of surprised because I knew that he had a secretary, but I didn't know that it would be like this early that he had a secretary.
Yeah, there's a lot about Miss Lemon.
Yes. Okay, so let's go over just like the brief plot. Let's see. So Hercule Poirot receives a letter, and it's kind of vague, and it's really private and confidential are the words used to describe it. And then he goes, and when he visits the source of the letter, he discovers that the letter's author is dead. Gasp, shock, surprise. Makes sense why he didn't receive a letter in return. He speaks with the family of the dead woman. And
he meets... Oh.
Go ahead.
3 people. Is it his niece? The dead woman's niece? Her husband, and the... Not maid, but like...
The nurse.
Helper?
The nurse and caretaker.
Yes.
Who's a bit younger and apparently half Russian, half English or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. I love this story because you get so much of just Poirot being Poirot, and it's awesome.
It actually wasn't my favorite.
Really?
I didn't like it as much. Yeah. So everyone thinks it's the nurse. Like, she's been framed. But then he's like, she has a friend. It's me.
I love that line. Yes,
that was good.
So he visits the police, and they discuss, and the police interview and give report to him the facts of the case. And then he kind of takes a little bit of time and thinks it over, and then he just kind of figures it out, and then sends people to confirm the facts that he already inferred, and voila, the murderer was the niece and her husband. Dun dun dun.
Do it.
Yeah, because he was trying to throw Poirot off, and he was all like, "You sure she didn't mention any Russians?" And okay, that brings us to this point.
I didn't even catch that. Oh, I'm so stupid.
Kayla! He literally is so...
communism.
He's so... Oh, anyway. It's very American, too. It's also an American thing to say. He says, "Look here," said Mr. Delafontaine. "She didn't mention Russians, did she?" "Russians? Yes, you know, Bolshies, Reds, all that sort of thing." And I'm like, "Sir! Excuse me, sir!" And I love that this, it has this theme of kind of foreigner and like kind of xenophobic prejudice, and Agatha Christie really calls that out in this short story.
She does that in a lot of books, I feel like, too, especially with Poirot, him being a foreigner.
Exactly. And actually, when he first visits the house of the dead woman, we get a little look into the maid's mind, not the Russian maid, but just like the housemaid. It says, let's see, I love this sentence so much. The front door had opened, and a neat little maid in a cap and apron was looking somewhat dubiously at the spectacle of a heavily mustached foreign gentleman talking aloud to himself in the front garden.
Oh, yeah, I did like this line. It was very good.
It was
or,
awesome.
Or he said something about, lady said, I'll look for it. You keep going.
Yes, and then there was another line where it says, she hesitated, divided between 2 strong instincts. The first, distrust distrust of a foreigner. The second, the pleasurable enjoyment of her class and dwelling on the subject of illness and death. And it's kind of interesting how there are two different stereotypes, or, well, one stereotype and one, like, kind of xenophobic prejudice in that sentence, kind of conflicting with each other.
Yeah.
At least in my mind, when I think about Agatha Christie actually writing that sentence, because it's like, oh, look at that. She's pointing out this xenophobia, this, like, natural instinct, right? But then also she stereotypes this maid as the, like, giving her certain, like, an enjoyment of her class. So saying, like, of course, her being in this class, she of course loves talking about illness and death and whatever.
I also think when Agatha Christie says that, I think she's kind of making fun of us. 'Cause, like, I feel like there's a lot of characters in her books that are always interested in having so much enjoyment in deaths that are happening, and they're like, ooh, we must figure it out. And I feel like she's directly pointing at the reader, being like, you're enjoying this a little too much.
Yes, that is so very true. That is so true.
Yeah.
Good point. Just a general note of, like, kind of literary style. I love that she kind of made it all about the garden. Like, in just, like, subtle details, like how she used flowers and plants in character and setting descriptions. Like, she says, like, the rose-colored curtains or cushions or something. And then the color of the lady's eyes are blue as forget-me-nots. And it all kind of...
Wait, are forget-me-nots a flower?
Yes. They're, like, a very...
over my head. But that's so cool.
Yeah, and it all kind of, like, draws your mind back to the garden, which kind of foreshadows and hints at, like, the clue, the key to to discovering the murderers. And then I love that she uses...
because of oysters? Okay, yeah. I actually did not understand. I feel like I read this whole thing and didn't understand any of it. The clue to figuring out the murder was that something in the garden.
Yes.
What was that?
Oysters. So they... you understand...
But did she mention it before that there were oysters in the garden?
No, it says... let's see, he paused and walked up the path and looked, of course, approvingly at the neatly planned beds on either side of him, rose trees that promised a good harvest later in the year, and the present daffodils, tulips, blue hyacinths. The last bed was partly edged with shells.
Oh, okay, so that's the clue right there.
Mm-hmm. And then he later talks about it was only partly edged. It wasn't the whole thing, but they wanted to make it look like it was intentional. So then he remembers the nursery rhyme. "O Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With cockle shells and silver bells and pretty maids all in a row." And I thought that was so cute that she either based it or took inspiration from a nursery rhyme, which she does in other things, like, and then
that was my note here. Nursery rhymes. She actually uses them a lot. Mm-hmm. Because she, like, I've read Five Little Pigs. That's a nursery rhyme. I know there's Buckle Your Shoe. I haven't read that. There's a bunch of them. Oh, and Then There Were None is partly based off of a nursery rhyme. Mm-hmm. And definitely interesting that that's a thing that comes up a lot.
It's kind of, yeah, and what you said about "And Then There Were None," it kind of tortures you, because, like, you know what's next, and it feels so familiar, but you just can't place it. So it kind of helps build suspense, I suppose. It keeps you really interested, and it gives you, like, clues, especially in this case. And it gives you a little dash of familiarity. So it's like, I've heard of this before, you know.
I had some other things that are my thoughts. And they're all about, like, things Agatha Christie uses a lot. One, and kind of funny, is that in all her books, the police are pretty useless.
Yeah.
You can, like, they don't really do anything.
Okay, I will argue that they do most of, like, the mechanical work. They do most of the investigating, like, asking and stuff. So that just kind of shaves time off of, like, reading in the short story. Like, it's...
I see, yeah.
Yeah. But there is that line where the Inspector Sims says to Poirot, like, you might be of use to us. You might actually help us a bit by the end of this. And I'm just like, oh no, sir. He gonna solve the whole damn thing, you know? And they do that a lot in Sherlock Holmes, too. Except in Sherlock Holmes, and I think in some Poirot stories, they also kind of do the same thing where the detectives, the police department takes credit for the detective's work.
And It's just, I guess, a good plot. You want your detective to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, the other thing is that she almost always uses, like, a poison.
Yes.
And I read somewhere that I think plot mechanics-wise, this works really well because anyone can use poison and kill somebody, right? But if it's, like, a more physical or violent crime, it rules out a lot more people.
Mm-hmm. And especially they tend to attribute the physical crimes to
guys.
Yeah, to men. Like they did that in Murder on the Orient Express. And then I remember he would point to like a shallow stab wound, and he was like, "But who did this then? If it was a strong man, I'm sure about that, you know." And that kind of brings us to another point of feminism. Yeah. Now, as we know, Agatha Christie isn't exactly the loudest feminist. She has some conservative cultural viewpoints or beliefs, especially in her attitudes toward how women dress. You'll kind of see that in her later stories and books. Mm-hmm. But as far as Poirot's secretary, I was kind of impressed. And also as far as...
Oh, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. Delafontaine, too. So let's go to Miss Lemon. So Poirot's secretary, she's kind of like him in that she's very organized. But she kind of is described as like a really unfeeling, like just kind of mechanical worker.
Yes.
She's described as the perfect machine, completely and gloriously uninterested in all human affairs. And I was like, wow, okay, so you have a robot with you. That's nice. But I mean, it's kind of helpful because it makes her confidential and discreet, like Poirot would want to be. But it's also kind of like, it also kind of makes her wholly incapable of engaging in any sort of like scandalous behavior. Especially in any like romance or with either her employer or with anyone who wants to like get an upper hand in an investigation or maybe an enemy of Poirot or something. So that's pretty useful. But I think Agatha Christie kind of took that a little too far, if that was her intention, when she described her physical appearance as an unprepossessing appearance. Her general effect was that of a lot of bones flung together at random. And I was like, ouch.
Okay, so my thoughts on this is this happens, I think, actually a lot when it comes to characters that are supposed to be, like, maids or service people or butlers or whatever. And I think it actually is slightly problematic because it's always like they love their job and they would never want anything else. Mm-hmm. And they just want to be of service to people. And I'm always like, I feel like people can use that to like justify
classism.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
And so I think, and it's not like, if it happens once, it's like, okay, cool, that's fine. But this is like, I've seen it in a lot of my books. I read one book, there was like a servant lady, and they're like, she is the ugliest person ever.
Yeah. And
I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Or they're just kind of reduced to being just like the maid. She's just all about the drama, right? And so she doesn't exactly have much of a personality aside from a little suspicion and a little like drama and gossip.
Yes.
Yes, I agree. Can be pretty problematic. I was thinking, I actually kind of was thinking for some reason about World War II and Rosie the Riveter, and I know that's in the U.S., but it was still kind of like a revolution as far as getting women into the workforce. So I was thinking, like, wow, this could be like interpreted as a kind of progressive character, because she prefers to be official, and she's really into her job, and it kind of shows like women are like capable and competent in the workforce. And then,
though I will say, in a lot of Agatha's books, women are very competent at working or at doing different things. Maybe that's a point that comes up because Agatha herself is like a working woman in that she writes and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then
I don't know.
I did find it weird that the secretary was just, like, loved her job so much that she dreamt about the perfect filing system. I was like, okay, girl, that's a little extreme. But so like her wholehearted devotion to her work is almost like satirical, and I was kind of hoping.
Yes, it is.
I was hoping that like it meant to come off that way, because then it would kind of like challenge the like limited like professional occupations into which women were like pigeonholed. It was like it was kind of saying like, yes, women can be really efficient and well suited for the workforce. And then also, Poirot compliments her and says she has the superior knowledge of the British tradesman. And she kind of has this knowledge of, like, economics and things that comes in useful for the investigation or the solving of the mystery. I was kind of annoyed that she had no imagination, whereas Hastings had an imagination. And I was like, why you gotta compare her to Hastings? She's like, at least she's not a creep, you know? Oh, yes. Mr. Delafontaine is described as nervous and quiet, and he submits.
Yeah, I really liked that.
Yeah, and he, like, naturally submits and prefers and expects his wife to lead all conversations. And,
and I read that, and I was like, this is a strong, like, intense woman.
Yeah, so I really appreciated that, too. And I was, I don't recall seeing many of those kinds of characters as, like, male characters in her work, so I was really pleased to see this, to read this. Yeah, and it didn't come off like she was trying too hard to make any sort of statement.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem, like, nowadays when women are, like, girl boss or like, strong women. They're just, like, so unrealistically...
They're just a little... Yeah. They're, like, a little too really emphatic. Weird.
So I recently watched Clue.
Uh-huh.
I absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched it twice, like in a row, like just back to back.
Oh, wow.
But anyways, the point was, very obviously like a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminded me of all these Christie novels because, like a lot of other murder mysteries, Christie novels are very much a comedy, right? Her detectives are kind of ridiculous and crazy and really funny.
Yeah.
And I think that murder mysteries, in some ways, kind of go very well with comedy.
Yeah, it's a good comedic relief. It's good to have a consistent comedic relief.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of, and it's great.
Because they can go two different ways. They can go really, like horror, kind of scary, or they can just be
kind of light.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even if it's not necessarily even if the characters themselves aren't really trying to be, like, light and, like, carefree or whatever, in their manner, it could just be something that they say very sincerely and, like, ironically that just strikes the right note, you know? Yes. Especially with Hastings. Oh my god, especially with Hastings. But yeah, it was really good to see, it was really nice to see, like, Poirot in his kind of, like, kind, amiable self.
Yes.
And it was a good balance to his respect for order and symmetry and everything. Because I heard that really kind of got on Christie's nerves sometimes.
Yeah. Did you guess the murderer?
I mean, kind of, but I definitely didn't guess the way that they killed her. And I knew it was probably not going to be Katrina because like that's what everyone else thinks, everyone who's usually wrong, you know?
Yes.
Especially with Poirot coming in with his own perspective as like a refugee immigrant.
Yeah, so you knew it wasn't her. There's not that many other characters.
Yeah. How did you feel about it as far as predictability?
I mean, I guess it was less exciting in that it wasn't like, you knew it wasn't her, so you're like, it's gotta be the only other two main characters. And so it was, I guess, more about how.
Yeah. It was a bit more linear. It wasn't like, it wasn't throwing you left and right.
I did feel like that the oyster thing was a little bit of, like, kind of a cop-out. Like, it wasn't the most... It was like, that's a detail we didn't really know about. And the only way we were supposed to it didn't feel like we could have figured it out. you know? Like,
Yeah.
the way we're supposed to figure it out, I guess, is to find out something wrong with the garden, but, like, that was one sentence.
Okay, but everything is kind of drawing your mind back to the garden, right? The description,
Yes.
the name, the rhyme, the title, I mean, the rhyme, and it just kind of, and the fact that the lady likes gardening, and he's all, really? Just, like, kind of little details that she just kind of, tosses at you.
But that one line, I was supposed to see from that one line that...
No, you weren't. I mean...
That shells? Oh my god, shells, oyster shells. What if they had oyster cells and those have a strong taste? It feels like a lot of deductions that I,
Oh yeah,
felt
no.
kind of impossible to figure out.
It definitely...
If that's what your goal was.
Yeah, it definitely felt like this isn't meant for you to try to, like, mull over and really think about. It's more like you just kind of observe as it kind of goes along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my problem with it, because I was reading it trying to figure it out. And some stories are, like, really good when you read it with that when you read it in that way, but this story I don't think was.
Yeah, I agree. And, okay, but she does do that sometimes in other, especially longer works, like her books. I think, it wasn't Death on the Nile. It was something else where there's, like, a detail and they kind of hint at it. And then, like, the detective goes somewhere else and the narrator takes over and tells you about his day, and then the detective comes back and blah, 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 and, like, several chapters later, he was like, while I was gone that day, I confirmed my suspicion that this tiny detail was really this, and here's the whole backstory I'll shove at you. And it's like, how are we supposed to know that, I think it was Murder on the Links, because that's why I really like the Poirot TV episode of that way better, because in the beginning, they started with, like, a recording, or the making of a recording about, what were they? Oh, shoot, I don't remember their name, but it was, like, their family, it started with a B, and it was, like, the B case, and Madame B was, like, involved in some case where, like, there was a kidnapping, and a murder, and then later that actually happens in the case that Poirot investigates, and he discovers that the neighbor is actually Madame B, and he's all like, mwahaha, But you don't know about the neighbor's actual identity, until, like, you're almost done with the book. So it's like, I couldn't have deduced that anyway, because I didn't know about this. So that's in that case, it's keeping way too much from the reader. But I would say, in a short story, it's acceptable, because it is a short story. And,
sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, like, one sentence being a clue in a short story is fine, because there's not that many sentences.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this one. There were several French terms I didn't understand, and I should have looked up.
Me either, but I'm not going to look those up. What? You really don't need... You don't need to know them for the story.
Yes,
they just add to Poirot.
Yes, it's all about characterization, and, like, and it's also, like, expand your knowledge, and don't just be, I don't know, limited to one language if you can have many. This is Alyssa.
And this is Kayla.
Thanks for listening to our podcast episode in which we discussed the Agatha Christie short story, How Does Your Garden Grow?
Catch us again on the Christie Club.